We're learning the first Sikha on Chag Shavuos in Likutei Sichos Chelek Chav Gimel on page 17. This Sikha here will discuss the mitzvah that lies upon every single Yid to write a Sefer Torah for himself. And the main point that Rabbi will discuss here is, why do we not see this mitzvah being fulfilled by everybody today? Or rather, the Rabbi will explain how is it that this mitzvah is fulfilled by everybody today. The Sikha is an extensive and thorough and deep discussion to understand properly the definition of this mitzvah according to the various opinions that there is on this subject, starting with the Rambam, and then the Rosh, and then the Ramah, which is the Psak Din Shulchan Aruch that we follow by, to explain how our minig today, or the way it is today, that we don't see people literally writing a Sefer Torah for themselves. The shir today is being learned with the Nishmas Rabbi Yosef ben Yamin ben Rabbi Nasha Koltman. The Rambam paskent. The Rambam rules the following: Mitzvah sasei al kol ish v'ishmi Yisrael. It's a mitzvah on every single man of Yidden. Lichtov Sefer Torah la'atzmai, to write a Sefer Torah for himself. Shenem, as the pasuk says, va'ato kisvu lachem es hashira. Write, and now you should write down this shira, this song. Now, simply, that pasuk is speaking about the shira of Hazinu. But the Rambam explains, Koloima, what this means is, Kisvu lechem Torah sheyesh ba shira zu. You should write the entire Torah that contains in it the shira. How do we know this? Lefi she'en kaisven es ha-Torah, parshias. Because a Sefer Torah, you're not supposed to write certain sections separately, a parsha or two parshas from the Torah, without writing it included in the entire Sefer Torah. So if the Torah says that you have to write the shira, that means within the entire Sefer Torah. Even if a person's father or ancestors left him a Sefer Torah that he now has, nevertheless, mitzvah lichtov mishaloi. There's a mitzvah to you to write one of your own. Ve'im kasvei biyadai, if you write a Sefer Torah with your own hands, harehu ki'ilu kiblo mehar Sinai. It's as if you have received the Torah directly from Har Sinai. If you do not know how to write a Sefer Torah, so then so someone else could write it for you. Anyone that checks over the Sefer Torah, even if you're checking over just to see one letter that it's written properly, that's considered as if you wrote the entire Sefer Torah, and you have the mile that it says before, as if you received it from Har Sinai. Stellt sich the Shaila. So now, based on this, the question is, wie bald das schreibt man Sefer Torah is a mitzvah sasei al kol ish v'ish. As the Rambam says, the mitzvah to write a Sefer Torah lies upon every single man. There's no exceptions to this. For was sagt man it? As man soll sich mishtadel sein, mekayim sein die mitzvah von schreiben a Sefer Torah biyada. So why do we not see that people make an effort to write a Sefer Torah themselves with their own hand? Which is kiyum ma mitzvah b'shleimusa. That is the fulfillment of the mitzvah in its perfect sense. As if you yourself received the Torah from Har Sinai. So the Rabbi here gives a simple approach to answer this. So seemingly we could say, as hatten or zu sagen, there's room to say, as oibes is faran a sefer mumche, verschreibt schener von ihm. If there's an expert scribe that writes a Sefer Torah more beautiful than you can yourself, so then you have to forgo on this reward or on this special idea that you write it yourself as if you received it from Har Sinai. So that's only when you write it yourself. Rather, you have to hire a Sefer Torah to write a Sefer Torah for you. Why? So then you'll have a beautiful Sefer Torah, written by an expert scribe. As the mitzvah is, we learn from the pasuk, that one should beautify the mitzvahs when he fulfills them in front of Hashem. So the idea of having a hiddur mitzvah, a mitzvah noah, is more important, and it pushes off the milah that there is of writing the Sefer Torah yourself and getting the schar as if you received it from Har Sinai. So that's why we don't find that people should make this effort to write a Sefer Torah themselves. Furthermore, we can say that it's actually not even pushing off the hiddur mitzvah of writing the Sefer Torah is not pushing off the milah of writing it yourself. And the reason is as follows. according to the explanation that the Tfur Shor says in the Inyan from mitzvah by Yesem B'Shluchai. So he discusses the matter that Chazal tell us, this is regarding all mitzvahs that can be fulfilled by appointing a shliach, but nevertheless, it's a mitzvah to do it yourself and not to appoint a shliach to do it for you. So he explains, what's the reason for this? As das ist der Fall, was man macht a shliach zu tana mitzvah, wenn man macht a shliach zu tana mitzvah. Because when you appoint someone to fulfill the mitzvah for you, nire ki eine reitze l'treich batzmai. It seems or it appears as if you're not interested in putting in the time or putting in the effort on your own. You can't be bothered by it. Or b'meila is nit kan cover da mitzvah. So it's not honorable for the mitzvah to just send someone else to fulfill the mitzvah for you. In other words, what he's saying is that doing the mitzvah yourself is not inherently more valuable than doing it through someone else. It's rather just a negative appearance that it has when you appoint someone else to do the mitzvah. Now, if that's the case, so then we could say, so if you're appointing a shliach to do it, only for the reason because you want to add more to the beauty, to the honor of the mitzvah, so you can't apply the idea of mitzvah b'yesem b'shlucha, which is all based on giving the mitzvah the right honor it deserves, but over here, the right honor the mitzvah deserves is dafka to appoint a shliach, to appoint an expert scribe. So over here in our case, was the kavod a mitzvah, his na'al of fun of a mitzvah, fadat alav laruma, for the honor of the mitzvah, to have a beautiful sefer Torah, it demands to have an expert scribe, is nita din for mitzvah ba yesem b'shluchai. The whole din of mitzvah ba yesem b'shluchai, that you have to fulfill it yourself rather than appointing someone else, does not apply. And along with this, apparently the Rebbe is saying here that the special schar and the maila of writing itself is also not applicable here, because the hiddur mitzvah is dafka through writing it with an expert scribe that will give it the proper hiddur. So therefore, this is a simple answer to explain why we don't see people making an effort to write a sefer Torah on their own. However, it does not answer this question why people are not writing a sefer Torah to fulfill this mitzvah. Warum me gefindt nit as man soll sich mishtadel sein, a fil as soll sein a cherem kais vom Leib. We don't find that people make an effort that someone else should write a sefer Torah for you. The whole answer here is based on the idea that, well, someone else writing it for me, an expert scribe, is much better than me doing it on my own. I'll have a beautiful sefer Torah. This would be a good answer if this would be the fact that we would see people making an effort that others should write it for me. We don't see this. We don't even find people making an effort to go and buy a sefer Torah or have a sefer Torah and check one letter that it should be as if you wrote it. Und damit machen kosher the sefer Torah by checking it to make sure that the sefer Torah is kosher. Was demult is arei kila kosve kula, and that then it's as if you wrote it all on your own. So, if so, the question comes back, so why do we not see that people should be mishtadel, should make an effort to write a sefer Torah themselves to fulfill this mitzvah? So this is the Rambam. So here in Sif Beis, we will see what it says in the Rosh, a very famous Rosh, regarding this mitzvah of writing the sefer Torah. So now simply we can answer this question, as their minig Yisrael in them is al pi das Rosh, that the custom regarding this is based on the opinion of the Rosh. As the chiyuv from ksiva sefer Torah of kol echad ve'echad, this obligation to write a sefer Torah that lies upon every individual is given b'deiros harishonim. That was in the earlier generations. Shahoya kaisim sefer Torah v'loimdim by. They would write a sefer Torah and they would learn from the sefer Torah. But today, shekaisim sefer Torah. When a sefer Torah is written, umanich anoisai bebatik nesiyas likris bei berabim. And the sefer Torah is left in the shul, it's left in the Aron Kodesh, and it's only used to learn from it on a Shabbos, on a Yom Tov, on a Monday, and a Thursday, and so on. Mitzvah sasei hi al kol ish mi Yisrael. So now, this mitzvah that lies upon every Yid, asher yodei maseges, that has the possibility, lichtov chumshe Torah. Instead, to write a chumash, to learn from the chumash, and that's what we learn from today. Mishnah, or Gemara, or Pirushel, to write a Mishnayos or a Gemara and all the other commentaries on it. Legis ben huabanav, to learn in it, he and his children. Ki mitzvahs ksiva sefer Torah, ksiva satayre he lilmeid ba. The mitzvah of writing a sefer Torah is to learn in it. Kedichsiv, as the pasuk says, "V'lamda as b'nei Yisrael sima b'fiyem," that you should learn. The Yidden should be able to learn from the Sefer Torah. Should place the words of Torah in their mouth. V'yidei Gemara v'hapirushim, and now today, through the Gemara that we learn from, and all the commentaries and all the paiskim that follow that explain the halach of the Gemara, Yeda Pirish HaMitzvahs V'Adinim Al Buryam. That's how you know the meaning of all the mitzvahs and all the halachas that you have to learn and know properly. L'chein, therefore the Rosh concludes, therefore, Heim Asfarim She'adam Mitzuva L'Kaisvam. So these are the Sfarim that a person is obligated to write them today. So here we see that the Rosh says that something has changed. That in today's times, it's not any mitzvah, is not anymore to write the Sefer Torah. The mitzvah today is to write Sfarim, Chumash, Mishnayos, Gemara, all the Pirushim, the Paiskim, to be able to learn from it. And this is the Psak Din that the Mechaber, the Beis Yosef, in the Shulchan Aruch says, Ha'idna, today, mitzvah lichtov chumshei Torah, or Mishnah, or Gemara, or Pirushaim. That today the mitzvah is to write Chumash, the Mishnah, the Gemara, and all the other Pirushim, Oladas Kama Paiskim, and furthermore, according to certain Paiskim, is Nachmed. This goes even further. As Ha'idna, today, is the mitzvah Belois, B'chumashin, Mishnah, Gemara, Cholo, Unnit B'Sefer Torah. That not only is the Rosh telling us that today, the mitzvah can be fulfilled also by writing a Chumash, Mishnayos, and Gemara, and not only by the Sefer Torah, because the main learning is from these Sfarim, but actually, according to some Paiskim, the mitzvah could only be fulfilled by writing Chumash, Mishnayos, and Gemara that we learn from, and not by writing the Sefer Torah. Okay, so this explains why today we don't see any effort of people investing into writing a Sefer Torah and writing the Sefer Torah themselves. Das is aber nicht maspik. However, this is not a sufficient answer for this question. Why? Because even regarding these Sfarim that the Rosh says that the fulfillment of the mitzvah is today, Chumashim, Mishnayos, v'chulu, is the Lashon HaRosh v'Tur v'Shulchan Aruch. What is the language the Rosh says describing the mitzvah? B'Lashon HaTzivi B'Kra. They use the same expression that the pasuk itself says. Mitzvah lichtov. The mitzvah is to write these Sfarim. Gefind nit klal u klal, and we don't find at all, as man soll sich mishtadel sein, schreiben die Sfarim, that people should make an effort to write Sfarim, to write a Chumash, to write the Mishnayos or a Gemara, or the Dingen nehmen, or hire someone was al schreiben for him that will write these Sfarim for him, or the lochalapachas magia sein a sefer shekana, or at least a sefer that you buy to open it up and to be magia, to check, to make sure that the print is proper and the words are proper, kedem mekayim zeh not mitzvah, in order to fulfill this mitzvah. So the question basically still remains, is just the same question we had before regarding a Sefer Torah, now becomes a question regarding the way the mitzvah should be fulfilled today. Regarding Sfarim, why don't people write Sfarim on their own? Or why aren't people magia Sfarim on their own today? Oh, nagam, as nachdem ist es nicht geworden tfus. Now, seemingly we could say that in this time period, after print became the way that Sfarim are printed and not written by hand, is minig roiv Yisrael kulam tzekayfin sifrei tfos. So the custom by majority, if not all, of Klal Yisrael is that you buy Sfarim that were printed is a fille v'mezal annehmen as the lashon lichtov in Rosh v'Shulchan Aruch is kail oich dem oifen von atfasa. So even if we'll say that when they say that one should write, so write includes also to print. Because today, print replaces writing. But if you're buying a book that has already been printed before, and you're just buying it in the store, you can't consider that as hiring someone to actually print these Sfarim for you. So the fulfillment of the mitzvah will be through print, okay? But you should have to hire somebody that's a shliach of yours, and he's going to be printing the sefer for you. We don't find this at all. And many times the printing job of these Sfarim is taking place in a printing company that doesn't even have a Yid that's working there. Of them. And nobody inquires about this. Who printed this book? Who printed the sefer? Is it a Yid? Is it not a Ben Bris, not a Yid? But seemingly the Rosh and the Torah and the Shulchan Aruch all write mitzvah lichtov, that the mitzvah is to write. The question is even further. This is also an important point here. That Rama paskint The Ramah says, "B'negeyat so a Sefer Torah." The Ramah speaks about a Sefer Torah, talking about the way the mitzvah was originally, that to write a Sefer Torah. As b'shas lok kach, if one buys, that is, a ready written Sefer Torah, v'lo yigia by davar, and he didn't check anything in the Sefer Torah itself to make it kosher, have a kachaytif mitzvah menashuk. It's like you're trying to grab a mitzvah somewhere in the marketplace. It's a negative expression. You're trying to find a mitzvah in a place where you won't find it. And you have not fulfilled your obligation by just buying a ready-made Sefer Torah from the store or from a scribe. Now, the Rebbe says, Nid vidas Rashi unamuke Yosef. This is not like another opinion of both Rashi and the Namuke Yosef, as euch demelt is mekayim de mitzvah, chotch nit mitzvah nit min amufchar. Their opinion is that if you buy a ready-made Sefer Torah, you have fulfilled your mitzvah, even though it's not in the best fashion. But the Ramah, the Psak Din Shulchan Aruch and the Ramah says that if you buy a ready Sefer Torah, then you don't fulfill your mitzvah. So the question is, how does one fulfill his mitzvah of writing a chumash, a mishnayos, or a gemara by buying ready-made svarim from the store without checking and making sure that the svarim are written right? Okay, so the Rabbi here in Sif Gimel tries another approach to explain, according to the Rosh, why today one does not have to write any of these svarim. Now simply, they all say the following. And here this is based on a famous Shagasariya regarding the subject and others. As in them besteht a chiluk zwischen das Harambam and das Harosh upsaka halacha b'shulchan aruch. That this exact point that we're discussing, whether the mitzvah is defined by the fact that there has to be an actual writing, or as long as you buy svarim from the store, it's good enough, this itself will depend on the argument between the Rambam and the Shulchan Aruch, and the way it's, and the Rambam and the Rosh, and the way it's passed in the Shulchan Aruch. As it's explained here, the Shit as a Rambam, according to the Rambam's opinion, as the mitzvah is ksiva Sefer Torah. The mitzvah even today is to write a Sefer Torah. There's no change in this. The Rebbe is das Mechayiv, as in dem soll sein, die Meise upulas Adam. So that means that the Rambam is defining the mitzvah, that the mitzvah is the very action of writing a Sefer Torah. So there's no change to that. The ksiva from the Sefer Torah, the writing of the Sefer Torah, that action is what the mitzvah is. As the Rambam says, it's not that you just buy a ready-made Sefer Torah. The mitzvah is to write. So you can hire a shliach that he will write it for you. But again, it's the writing that he's doing for you. And further, the Rambam says, when you check over even one letter from a Sefer Torah, it's as if you have written the whole Sefer Torah, because that is the mitzvah. That's why the Rambam is telling us that this will replace as if you wrote the whole thing. And therefore you cannot be yaitze by writing by buying rather, a ready written Sefer Torah. So that's according to the Rambam. However, according to the Rosh, and according to the halacha that it says in Shulchan Aruch, as mitzvahs ksivas haTorah hilul ba, that the mitzvah of writing a Sefer Torah is for what purpose? So the Rosh says the main thing is that you should have the Sefer Torah to learn from it. Und der Fahr is negeya as man soll haben die Svarim auf zu lernen and say. The main point here of the mitzvah is having the Sefer Torah to learn from it, aber nicht zu schreiben say. The mitzvah is not to write or even to check over. If the only way you can get the svarim is by writing, so then yes, you're going to have to write or be magia, sefer Torah. But that's just sort of a hechsher, prepared to fulfill the mitzvah. The actual mitzvah is the fact that you have the svarim to learn from them. So according to the Rosh, today you can buy a ready printed svarim in the store, because since the Rosh defines the mitzvah that it's not the action of writing, the mitzvah is to have, so you buy the ready-made svarim. So basically, according to this approach, it would come out that the Ramah that says that you're not yaitze by buying from the marketplace is not going according to this Rosh. And the Rosh is really talking about regarding the Sefer Torah. Okay, so the Rebbe later in the Sikha will come back to this Rosh, to that Ramah rather, as we'll see. Okay, so this is one approach which would very simply explain why today we buy printed svarim and we're yaitze the mitzvah with that. However, von dem Teichen in Rosh is mochach nit wie der Chiluk kanal. If you look at the content of the words of the Rosh, it's clear that this distinction is not the Rosh's intention. The Rosh sagt, the words of the Rosh are, V'zehu b'deiris harishonim chulu. He explains the mitzvah, and he says that the mitzvah of writing the actual Sefer Torah, this is all in earlier generations when they would learn from it. And he says this, behemshech zum loshen v'das Rambam. He brings this after he brings the language and the opinion of the Rambam, was bringt. So what do we understand from this? Is move on, as the Rosh is nit oisen zum mechader sein, an nayim geder in mitzvahs ksiva Sefer Torah, anders wie der Rambam. That the Rosh, his point here, is not to say a completely different understanding of what the mitzvah is, different than the Rambam. That the Rambam would hold that the mitzvah is the action, the writing it. And the Rosh is saying, no, it's not about the writing, it's about having. It's not what it seems like in the Rosh. He actually quotes the Rambam, and only then does he say that there's a difference between then and today. So nar blois zum machalik zayin ben azmanim. All he's adding is, he's making a distinction in the time periods. Benegei was man soll schreiben, what it is that you have to write. As the idna is the mitzvah lichtov chumshei atayra mishnah v'gemara pirushay and lages ben hu ubanav. That today, because the Sefer Torah is kept in the Aron Kodesh in the Beis HaKnesses, so the mitzvah today is to write chumash, mishnayos, and gemara. So it's just as far as the time periods and what you have to write. But the definition of the mitzvah, according to the Rambam and the Rosh, remains lichtov, to write. So therefore, the question really remains, why do we not see that people make an effort to actually write any of these svarim? Ich darf verstehen, an additional thing that we have to explain, and this will be something that will give us clarity on the whole subject here, the Esbara and the Tzvei Deis. Let's have a better understanding of the two opinions that was quoted earlier. Tzimiz yaitze kiyum mitzvahs ksiva Sefer Torah mit blois kaifen a Sefer Torah. Could you fulfill the mitzvah of writing a Sefer Torah by just buying a ready-made Sefer Torah? Vidas Rashi v'Hanemuki Yosef, as the opinion of Rashi and the Hanemuki Yosef, as oich damot mitzvah avat, he has fulfilled the mitzvah. Nor I kasva have a mitzvah yisera. If you write it yourself, it's a greater mitzvah. Other is nit yetze damit, or you're not yetze when you buy a Sefer Torah. Kedas Ramah, as the opinion of the Ramah, and so it seems is the opinion of the Rambam, which emphasizes that the mitzvah is the writing, that you should write it yourself. As a blockchay, as the Ramah says, kach, you write it, you buy it that is ready made, and you did not check yourself anything in the Sefer Torah, so you're not yetze with this. So let's get a better understanding of this machlokes, whether the mitzvah is to write, or that you have to write yourself the Sefer Torah, or you could buy a ready-made Sefer Torah. And you would simply think that the explanation of this machlokes is the point that the Rebbe said before, whether the mitzvah is the action, to write the Sefer Torah, or the mitzvah is to have svarim to learn from. So then you can just buy a ready-made Sefer Torah. But the Rebbe, as we'll see, will point out from the Lashon of the Pasuk and from the Rosh and the Rambam, we see that the Rishonim all define the mitzvah as right. The Rambam says so, and the Rosh, even though he says there's a difference in the time period, but nevertheless, he doesn't veer off from the foundation of the mitzvah, which is lichtov. So therefore, the Rebbe will give a different explanation for the machlokes, whether you could be yetze by buying a Sefer Torah, or you must write it on your own. So here in Sif Dalid, the Rebbe will begin with a very basic question on the Rosh to open up over here a deeper understanding of the Rosh's opinion. So to understand this, we must first have a clearer understanding in the opinion of the Rosh and the actual Psak Din Shulchan Aruch. How is it possible to say such a novel thing as a mitzvah sasem and a Torah zal nishtan werden mizman lizman, that a mitzvah to write a Sefer Torah should change from one time period to another. Bis zu sagen, so much so that the Rosh says, as ha'idna is the mitzvah nit wie sie is mefurish b'Torah, that today the mitzvah is not like it's explicitly written in the Torah, kisvu lachem hashira hazais, to write this shira, which is the Sefer Torah. Now, as the Rosh Alein is mevayer, ki mitzvahs, ksivas ha-Torah, hi lilmoid ba, k'dichsev, v'lamdas b'nei Yisrael, sima b'fiyem. The Rosh himself says, well, the point and the purpose of this mitzvah is that you could learn from it, and you could place it in your mouth. So therefore, today, we learn from Chumash, from a Gemara, so therefore the mitzvah today is fulfilled differently. That's the explanation that Rosh himself says. But this is not at all sufficient. Das is aber l'chayre nor tachlis u'mechoven mitzvah. So that's the purpose of the mitzvah, the point of the mitzvah, Aber Maisa ha-mitzvah gufe steht doch mefurish in Torah. The action of the mitzvah itself is written explicitly in the Torah. Kisvu lachem es ha-shira hazais, that you should write this shira. A mitzvah zu schreiben a Sefer Torah. This is a mitzvah to write the actual Sefer Torah itself. So where's there room to say that this mitzvah itself should be changed? Just because the Torah gives a certain reason about the purpose of the mitzvah, that's not enough of a reason how the very mitzvah itself, which is very clear what it is, should change. So this leads us over here in Sifei into a deeper understanding of the Rosh's opinion in the mitzvah of writing the Sefer Torah. So we can say the explanation here is as follows. Von dem, was gleich noch dem, kisvu lechem gomer, from the fact that right after the Torah says, kisvu lechem, that you should write the Sefer Torah, is the pasuk mamshech, the pasuk continues and says, as the tachlis ha-mitzvah is, v'lamda es b'nei Yisrael, sima b'fiyem, that you should learn from it and place it in their mouth. V'sizoich muvam von der ganze hemshech ha-parsha. And this is also the continuation of the whole parsha here that's discussing the fact that Yidden are going to learn from the Torah. As in Yonah from Ksiva Sefer Torah is bichdei es soll sein sima b'fiyem, that the Torah, the psukim here are saying that the whole point of writing the Sefer Torah is so that they could be placed in their mouth. As the Torah soll bei sie werden lo'ad, that the Torah should be with the Yidden forever, euch in dem Zman wenn v'ni atzuni ve'hefer es brisi, even in a time period where there's rebellion against Hashem and Yidden are desecrating the bond with Hashem. So the phone learned to raise the Rosh from the context of the psukim over here that it says directly right after. It says the mitzvah of writing, so the Rosh learns out from this, as der inyan from kisvu lechem. The idea of the Torah telling us to write, yes, the mitzvah, it does include dafka writing, is nit der etzem gedera mitzvah. However, this is not the essence of how we define the very mitzvah. Nor blois achiv prati in der mitzvah. It's a certain detail of the very mitzvah itself. So in other words, the point that I was saying over here is, yes, we can't take the pasuk out of its pashat pshat. In the pasuk it does say kisvu lechem, so the mitzvah is to write dafke. However, the fact that the mitzvah is to write, that doesn't define the mitzvah. That's a detail as a result of what the essence of the mitzvah is. Once we understand what the essence of the mitzvah is, we'll understand why the detail of writing enhances that and becomes a prat in what the essence of the mitzvah is about. So in other words, unlike the pshat that the Rebbe brought before, that according to the Rosh, there is no mitzvah b'chlal of writing. The whole mitzvah is just to have the svarim to learn from it. The writing is just sort of a preparation to be able to have. Here the Rebbe says no. The mitzvah is to write because it says it clearly in the pasuk. However, that mitzvah that it says write is a prat of the mitzvah. It's a detail of the mitzvah as a result of what the overall definition of the mitzvah is. Now, to understand what the definition of the mitzvah is, the Rebbe will soon explain. But before this, the Rebbe gives us here an example of where we see that such a thing is possible. The Torah writes explicitly one language, but that's only one detail of the mitzvah. So an example for this would be the Torah is like by mitzvahs mezuzah. By the mitzvah of mezuzah, the pasuk says, "Uchesavtom ha-mezuzah is beisecho v'sharecha." You should write the mezuzah on your house, on your entrances. So it says uchesavtom, to write. Chod the gedra mitzvah is nit ksivas ha-mezuzah. What defines the mitzvah? The writing of it, that you should write it on the doorpost, nor lekvaya mezuzah. Rather, the mitzvah is to have it written and then affix the mezuzah to your doorpost. That's the main definition of the mitzvah. So yes, the ksiva is a detail of the mitzvah in order to have it affixed on your door. But that's not the definition of the mitzvah. So coming back over here to the mitzvah of ksiva sefer Torah. So how do we define the mitzvah itself? What is the etzem geder of the mitzvah? The geder mitzvah is, the definition of the mitzvah is as follows. Ubehektem, with the following introduction. Es is da die mitzvah von limudat Torah. So first, there's the mitzvah of learning Torah. V'yisayre mizeh, even more so, the Talmud Torah keneget kulam. Talmud Torah, the mitzvah of learning Torah, is equal to all other mitzvahs in the Torah. Und in der mitzvah is the ikke wissen kol ha-halachis psukis b'tameim. What defines the mitzvah of learning Torah? The mitzvah of the knowledge to know Torah, and that is to know all the halachis of Torah, and with the reasons as well. Und das is chayevu min ha-Torah. This is an obligation for every single year to know all the mitzvahs of the Torah with their reasons. Und bis an as shnunim u'mechudadim beficha. That this has to be clear and sharp in your mouth. Anytime someone asks you a question, you should have the ability to have it clear, to respond immediately what the halacha is. That is the halacha of limud HaTorah that every yid has upon himself, even before we come to the mitzvah of writing a Sefer Torah or writing any svarim. Is doch shein da lamda sima befiem even best neiven. So because of this mitzvah, you already have this mitzvah and the fulfillment of this mitzvah of learning and understanding and having the words of Torah on your mouth perfectly. Because the mitzvah of Talmud Torah itself requires this, that you should have the words to be able to answer immediately what the halach is. So that's even before you come to the mitzvah of writing the Sefer Torah. But it's over here in this context of this mitzvah to learn and have the Sefer and have the words of Torah clearly on your mouth. And here the Torah adds a special mitzvah in the fulfillment of the mitzvah of learning Torah. As mezoltana ma'aseh ksiva, you should do an action. Write a Sefer Torah to bakumen, a Sefer Torah shebiksav. To write a Sefer Torah, the Torah shebiksav. We were talking about writing not Torah Shebal Peh, but dafka to write Torah shebiksav, and learning in their Torah, and to be able to learn from this Torah. This enhances your learning and having the Torah in your mouth by you doing an action to write the Sefer Torah yourself. So yes, the mitzvah taka is dafka to write. The reason why the Torah is writing kisvu is because that is an important part of the mitzvah, or that is really what the mitzvah is. That's the yesod of the mitzvah. However, though, what's really the definition of the mitzvah? What's the essence of the mitzvah? The essence of the mitzvah is to have the learning of the Torah perfectly, to have the sima b'fiyem, that the Torah is in your mouth perfectly. On that comes this detail, how you're going to have it perfectly. If you yourself are going to take action and write a Sefer Torah for yourself, then this will enhance your learning and having the Torah on your mouth. Why is that? So we can say the reason is as follows. Then, when you write a Sefer Torah, you take action and write a Sefer Torah, is der limud leichter und tiefer. So then you can learn easier and deeper, because oisius machkimais. Because when you see letters, when you learn something in the text inside, it makes you smarter. It adds to the wisdom, to understanding of the learning. Zicher von atos, and you're also sure of making a mistake. When you learn something from the text of the Sefer inside, you don't forget as quickly, or you don't forget quickly what you learn. And you have the Sefer Torah of your own, you always have it available to review at any time. And this all forewarns a person not to come to a situation where he ends up desecrating the bond with Hashem. So here we see the point that the Rebbe is mechadish, that on one hand, the mitzvah is dafka d'ksiva, to write. However, the writing, though, is just a detail of the mitzvah, because the essence of the mitzvah is really the limud, the learning of it. But in order that the limud should be proper, that you should receive it fully and have it fully available for yourself, so the ksiva makes that possible. So the mitzvah is taka d'ksiva. But in the larger context of the mitzvah, the ksiva is just a detail that is making possible the whole gather of the mitzvah to be fulfilled, which is to have the Torah, to learn it. So now, in the time that this command was said, the mitzvah was said, is the ma'aseh ksiva given verbunden v'efsheri. So the action of writing a Sefer Torah was connected to, or was only possible, nor durch limud and a Sefer Torah, only through learning from a Sefer Torah, Torah shebiksav, to learn from Torah shebiksav, from the written Torah, from the varon. Why is that? Because Arya hu derivia alei, to use an expression that the Gemara uses, that Arya derivia alei of gavra, that you have an external force or an external isser, a prohibition that's not allowing you to write anything other than a Sefer Torah. This expression of Arya Derevia literally means is a lion that's stopping you of entering here, meaning that there's this external thing that's not letting you do otherwise. Because in that time period, it wasn't allowed to write the oral Torah, Torah Shebal Peh. In that time period, to take the words of the oral Torah and write them down was not allowed. It had to be given over by tradition. So therefore, to fulfill this mitzvah of writing, what could you write? Only the Sefer Torah. So that's how it's fulfilled. Now, durich dem Arya Derevia, but because of this lion, so to speak, this outside prohibition that doesn't allow you to write anything other than the Sefer Torah, kommt zu als seitige Sach. So this now adds other and outside details to this mitzvah of writing the Sefer Torah. Nicht mitzad dem inyan didon von velamda sima befiem. And these details of how a Sefer Torah is written is not integral to the actual mitzvah of writing the Torah. It's just not mitzad dinim via zoi verta Sefer Torah. It's rather just a result of the halachas that apply to a kosher Sefer Torah. How do you write a kosher Sefer Torah? So not that the actual mitzvah in itself of writing the Sefer Torah or writing the Torah requires these particular dinim. The halachas of Sefer Torah requires it. The kedusha of a Sefer Torah requires all kinds of halachas. As dav zayin sirtut, you have to etch in to make these lines before you write with the ink. That should be written nicely and straight. Lishma has to be written for this l'shem kedusha of the Sefer Torah, for the sake of the Sefer Torah. B'ksav ashuri, you have to write with the right letters of a Sefer Torah. B'lashon hakodesh, only in the language of lashon kodesh. V'chulu, and other halachas that apply to a Sefer Torah. So the fa b'degeya lepayol muz der kisvu lechem zayin aksivim mit prate dinim anal. So practically, the mitzvah in that time period is to write a Sefer Torah with all these halachas that apply to writing a Sefer Torah. But the source of all these details that apply is not a din. They're not details in the halacha of the mitzvah of writing the Sefer Torah. It's because now the mitzvah could only be fulfilled with the Sefer Torah. So therefore, the dinim of the kedusha of the Sefer Torah will apply. However, today, then mitzad eis lasas lashem efeda teresecha. So now, because it came a time period, as the Gemara says, that because it was 100% necessary, and the Chazal saw this, and therefore they said it came the time period to, so to speak, desecrate the words of the Torah. So therefore, they allowed to write down also the words of Torah Shebal Peh. So therefore now to learn from the Sefer Torah and to know these halachas properly is nit von a Sefer Torah. It's not by learning from the Sefer Torah, nor from the Verschribene, Chumshe Torah, Mishnah, Gemara, Upirishayim. We're rather learning from the Chumash, Mishnah, and Gemara, and everything else that comes. Is the mitzvah from Kisfu, the Maise verbunden mit these Svarim. So now the mitzvah of writing Svarim is related to these Svarim. Now the mitzvah is to write these Svarim the way they are written. Und bei sie is nidokin din sirtut v'chulu. Here the halacha of sirtut, etching into the lines before you write with ink, doesn't apply. The prati din was an Adana Sefer Torah. All the details of how you have a proper Sefer Torah with its kedusha does not apply. It's behesem lezeh. So therefore, fitting with this, beim kiyem a mitzvah durich zei, over here when you fulfill the mitzvah through these svarim, dav zayin un maspik, and so it should be and it's enough. Am meise velechem macht zei far svarim, when you write and you make svarim, veleches kan zayin vilimda sima befia mitoich haksav, that you now have svarim to learn from, and you have the svarim that you can place it into your mouth, that it should be mitoich haksav to write them. Okay, so the point here that the Rebbe is saying is, yes, the mitzvah does refer to ksav, writing. However, the writing is a detail in the larger context of the point and the geder of the mitzvah, not just the purpose of the mitzvah, but the actual definition of the mitzvah itself, which is limudat Torah, the lamda v'sima b'fiyem. For the purpose of the limud to be proper, so the Torah is giving the mitzvah of writing. That enhances in that you should have the sefer available to always learn and to review and so on. So yes, the mitzvah is ksav, but there's no change here in the mitzvah. Even originally, the mitzvah would theoretically be to write other svarim other than the Sefer Torah. It's just that originally, no other svarim were allowed to be written. So the Sefer Torah is the only sefer that was written, and then it comes along automatically with all the halachas of Kedusha Sefer Torah. Today, though, the mitzvah remains again just to write. But to write what? To write in the larger context of what the gather of the mitzvah is, to have available to learn. So that refers to writing other svarim, and therefore the other halachas of Sefer Torah do not apply here. We can give an example for this, that the Gemara, an expression the Gemara uses, al derech dain mina v'oiki ba'asra. When you learn out one halacha from another, and you're comparing one to another, so sometimes you learn out the halacha itself from a certain source, but then when you apply it back to this place that you're learning to, you apply it accordingly in this place, in what the definitions of this halacha demand. So yes, you're learning from A to B, but then B itself has its own definitions, and therefore the application of the halacha here will change. So too we can say there is the concept of the mitzvah. The original point of the mitzvah here is not original. The point of the mitzvah always is to write a Sefer Torah, to have the Sefer Torah available to learn. But it could be Sefer Torah when you can't write anything else, or it could be other svarim. So therefore, if you're writing a Sefer Torah, so now the definition of the halachas of Sefer Torah applies. When you write other svarim, so now Oike Basra, the halachas of regular svarim apply, and all the kedusha of how to write it does not apply here. And here in Sivav, the Rebbe brings us examples of other mitzvahs where we see a similar thing, that a mitzvah could be applied and fulfilled in different time periods in a different way according to the gather of that context where it's being fulfilled in. So somewhat of an example for this. The chi of simcha b'yomtiv, the obligation of simcha, of joy on a yomtiv. In the time of the Beis Hamikdash, so you brought a carbon shlamim for the simcha, to eat the meat of this carbon for the simcha. Is lekamedeis, according to some opinions, chal midayraisa oich bezman hazeh. This takes effect even today. Durech achilas basar, by eating meat today. Was saying simcha ela babasar. Simcha, the joy of the yontiv, is only with the eating of meat, and therefore today you're not eating from a carbon, but you're eating the meat that you have, and that's the fulfillment of the mitzvah of simcha. Now, as is movan bepashtos, it's understood simply as the simcha bebasa bezman hazeh, that the joy with the meat that's eaten today on yontiv hat nit the gedarim v'zenedan shalmi simcha. The meat does not have the halachas and all the requirements that there are regarding how you eat a carbon. Has to be eaten when you're pure, on Yerushalayim chulu, only in certain places, on Yerushalayim. Das seinen als in Yonim und Hagdaris mit Sadem Inina Carbon for Shalmi Simcha. All those details of how the carbon of Shalmi Simcha has to be eaten are not requirements based on the actual definition of the mitzvah of Simchas Yom Tov. Rather, they are things that come as a result of the fact that the mitzvah is being fulfilled through the carbon, so the halachas of the carbon will apply over here to the fulfillment of this mitzvah. Aber nit mitzad geder has simcha shabai. The joy, which is the essence of the mitzvah, the definition of the mitzvah, that doesn't require all the halachas of how it should be eaten and where it should be eaten. Was nar das is nigeya l'deyazu l'kiyah mitzvah simchas yantav. According to this opinion, the simcha, and which is there when a person eats basar, that's the main definition of the mitzvah. So therefore today, the fulfillment of the mitzvah is through eating basar, which is not a carbon. So accordingly, we apply it to the basar that you eat today, and those different limitations that apply to our carbon does not apply. This is one example. So the same we could say over here in our case. To use the expression of the Gemara, that this is not the point. There's no reason to apply all these details that are not applicable here, that it's applicable somewhere else, but not here. The alle prate dienen, was sind da in Ksiva Sefer Torah, sind mit Sadem Chefze von Sefer Torah. The details of the halachas of how Sefer Torah has to be written is only because of the object itself, the Sefer Torah itself that requires all these halachas. Nit mit Sadem Chiyuv mitzvah von Kisvu lechem es ashira azais, b'chdei es l'kenen zayin v'lamdo an sima b'fiyem. But not the mitzvah of writing a Sefer Torah, where the gather of this mitzvah is to have a Sefer or Sefer Torah available to learn from it. That mitzvah does not require all these kedusha that a Sefer Torah itself has in it. So it's understood as Eich L'das Harash, that even according to the Rash's opinion, is in the gather ha-mitzvah hazu, regarding the definition of this mitzvah of writing the Sefer Torah, nit kevar and kein shini. There is no change at all in the fulfillment of the mitzvah. There's a change in the actual writing, because Kedusha Sefer Torah requires, as there's other mitzvahs or other halachas, that there is a change in B'payil. But in this mitzvah that we're discussing, the mitzvah of writing the Sefer Torah, there's no change. The mitzvah is to learn and to write, to have available to learn. So either it's a Sefer Torah, or in our time period, it's with other Sfarim. So there's never a change in the mitzvah. So now, this is the beginning for us coming to explain why and how today we fulfill the mitzvah with other svarim. but it doesn't yet fully answer it. This is just one fundamental point to answer this. But now, the question though still remains, to go back to the beginning of this whole discussion, we still do not see as that people should fulfill the writing from the Chumash to write a Chumash. Not this tut matvis v'chayetze. The printer does this. And even if you are ordering and hiring the printer to print for you, and you appoint him as your personal shliach to fulfill this mitzvah, is doch mitzvah ba yesem b'shluchai. But nevertheless, to have the mitzvah on the highest level, you should do it yourself instead of appointing a shliach for this. So why don't we find that people do so? So here, this last point that Rebbe says is das verenfit loit dem bir le'el sifalef b'negei l'sefer Torah. So the fact that people are not fulfilling the mitzvah of printing the Sfarim themselves, and rather they're hiring a printer or they're getting it from someone else to write the Sefer Torah for them, is because, well, the printer has the proper machines and he can print it in the best and most beautiful fashion. If you're going to try to print Sfarim on your own, it's not going to be as beautiful and do as good as a job as the printer in the printing press that prints Sfarim. So that's the point that the Rebbe said before in the Sikha. But now based on the way that Rebbe defined this mitzvah of writing the Sefer Torah, so there's another very important point that comes out of here, lekaman siftes, as we will see the conclusion of this subject here, to answer this later in siftes. But before we get to that, the Rebbe first brings other examples in Torah where we find this idea that you can take something and you have the application of it in another time period, which is different than the way it is in its source. Based on what we explained here, as b'shayches fun zwei inyanim, when you have the relation of two different things, ken zayin pratim v'lechazenen doin mina umina. Sometimes there are details that you learn out from a certain source and you apply it elsewhere, and you apply it elsewhere fully. Mina umina means you apply all details. But then upratim, there are other details that you cannot apply fully, but you have to apply it accordingly, meaning that there are certain definitions that apply here, and therefore it will be applied differently than the source. We could also explain other things that we find, to use an example of different areas in Yiddishkeit. Tfilis b'mokim t'midim tiknum, when it comes to davening. So davening was instituted to take the place of the carbon tamid that was brought every day in the Beis HaMikdash in the morning and in the afternoon. For deswegen, but nevertheless, is afilu lechatchila nitokin ishtadlos as es soll sein in dem Tzibur, as es soll sein in dem Tzibur HaKayin. We don't find that there should be any effort made that in every minyan that's davening, that there should be also a kayin included in this minyan, even though a carbon has to be brought only through a kayin. So you would expect that today we should do it similar to the way it was then, that a kayin should have to be in part of the minyan. Now, Vahatam, the Rebbe in parentheses says the reason for this is the matzina carbon below kayin, because we do find that a carbon could be brought without a kayin at all, because the ein kayin bebama. In the time period when Yidden were bringing karbanis by a bama, before there was the Beis HaMikdash, the time period between Mishkan Shilei and so on, so in a bama, so there's no necessity for a kayin. So we do find that a carbon is brought without a kayin. But on the other hand, though, when it comes to the time periods of the davening, the time periods of the davening is in the same times that the carbon is brought, in the morning and in the afternoon. So on one hand, we're learning out this detail from karbanis, but on the other hand, other details we're not learning out. So even though the Rabbi gave a reason, but nevertheless, you would still think that let's apply it fully as much as possible. But we don't. Not every detail applies. Now, regarding the time periods, why is that more significant that we do apply it? Because regarding a carbon, there's no exception to this. Every carbon that is in a certain time frame, if that time passes, the carbon can't be brought anymore. So therefore, for davening as well, the davening has a certain time frame. Another example, in Seder Leil Pesach, when it comes to the Seder, the night of Pesach, the minig b'medina seilu is, so the custom in our countries is as follows: as mizniza nitzuesim basat sali b'leil Pesach. We're careful not to eat roasted meat at the night of Pesach at the Seder. Gzeire shemeyomru Pesachu. Because this is a decree that Chazal said not to do so, people may come to say, look, someone's eating a carbon Pesach today. On the other hand, though, nentmen azroya tzluya, we do take and put on the seder and on the kaira a zroya that is roasted, zeichel pesach shayetz liyesh, which is to commemorate the carbon pesach that was roasted. So on one hand, we are bringing and comparing to what it was then to have a roasted piece of meat on the seder, on the kaira, and at the same time, though, not to eat it, not like it was then that the mitzvah was to eat it. Now, so again, we fulfill it in some way, but we don't apply it the way it was then. We don't eat it. And the reason why the main focus of not to fulfill it today the way it was then is regarding the eating. Because the eating is the main mitzvah of the Pesach. The whole mitzvah from the beginning is all about eating it. So therefore today we don't fulfill them, we make sure not to eat it. So again we see it's applied in one sense, but not applied in the other sense. A third thing that Rabbi says, the klal, the rule that you have, as Reb Ploni v'Reb b'shita achas kaimi. When you have sometimes two Tanaim that may be saying their opinion in different places in Shas regarding different subjects, but the Gemara will say that their opinions go hand in hand and they are really saying one point. But his move on, nevertheless, it's understood as even though they generally follow one approach, but there are details where they are different. And there's practical differences between them. If they're saying one and exactly the same thing as my kamashman ben yanim shainim, so why are they each teaching their halacha in different subjects as if they're the only one that spoke about this? Their lashon v'od given, and additionally the halacha, the lashon would have been Rapleni v'Rapleni Omru, that these two Tanaim together said the same thing, as you do find sometimes. But if you find that two Tanaim each say separately their opinion on a certain matter, and then the Gemara says that they really both are saying the same shitta, the same approach, but it still means that they only agree in some things, but in other things they still disagree. So the fact that they are agreeing is not a contradiction to say that in other areas they disagree. So therefore, we can say over here, and I was bringing all this as an example where we find the concept of dain mina v'oiki ba'asra, that regarding certain things, it's the same as the source from where we learn it out from. But then when you apply it, so then the halacha changes. V'oid kehena, and there's other examples that we find for this. Okay, so now here in Sifches, we come back to the Ramah, because the Ramah is the one that we follow, his actual halacha, and this will give us the opening to understanding how and why Bisman Hazeh, people just buy Sfarim and we're Yaitze the mitzvah with this. All right, so that was the question that Rebbe left off with, that after all, the mitzvah, the definition of the mitzvah, still is lichtov, as the pasuk says, to write. So true, that's only a detail of the mitzvah. It's not the very definition of the mitzvah, but nevertheless, the mitzvah is to write, so why don't we fulfill this today? So now, coming back to this, based on what we explained before, we can now say, as dos was the Ramah pasket. This that the Ramah rules. If you just buy a ready-made Sefer Torah, and you didn't check over even one letter in it. You're grabbing a mitzvah from the marketplace, but you haven't fulfilled your mitzvah. And as Yaitze Dafke, then you only fulfill your mitzvah if either you hire a sefer to write you a sefer Torah, or you buy a sefer Torah and there were mistakes in it and you checked it over and fixed it. Nit vidas Rashi v'Nemuki Yosef, not like the opinion of Rashi and the Nemuki Yosef, as oich ven lokach sefer Torah men ashok is memekayim the mitzvah, that even if you buy the sefer Torah from the marketplace, a ready-made sefer Torah that is, so you fulfill the mitzvah. So now it says the Rebbe, this psak of the Ramah is das gesagt geworden nor beksiva sefer Torah. This was only said regarding writing a sefer Torah. Aber benegeya di chumshe haTorah u Mishnah u Gemara u Pirushaim. But regarding writing a chumash or the Gemara, the Mishnayos, and all other svarim that we have today, was ha'idne b'shteten zei di mitzvahs kisfu lechem l'das harash. And today, according to the Rosh, this is the fulfillment of the mitzvah, is melokula alme yoitze durch kaufen di svarim and learning and say. Everybody will agree, like the opinion of Rashi and the Nemuki Yosef, that the mitzvah today is fulfilled by just buying these Sfarim, even without any action of writing these Sfarim or being Magia these Sfarim. Just buying printed Sfarim. And this is the point. This is we're here with the Rebbe's answer. We're following the Psak Din of the Ramah, and today we're Yaitze just with buying Sfarim, buying printed Sfarim. But what's the explanation for this? The Rebbe explained before that the mitzvah is to write. It's a detail of the mitzvah in the larger context of what the mitzvah is, to be able to learn from it, but nevertheless, that is a detail that you should write. The explanation here is as follows. So in order to understand this, we first need to explain the machlokes b'chlal between the Rosh and the Rambam on one hand, or the Ramah as well, and on the other hand, the Ramukhi Yosef and Rashi, which say, again, they're arguing whether the mitzvah is dafka to write, or you can be yetz the mitzvah just with buying. So once we get a deeper understanding of that machlokes, we'll understand why, regarding today, when it's Sfarim and not a Sefer Torah, that machlokes does not apply anymore. Everybody agrees that the mitzvah is fulfilled by buying printed Sfarim. So the explanation here is as follows. Lukula Alma is the mitzvah from Kisvu Lechem Ageda from Kabbalah Satera. So to define this better, everybody agrees that the mitzvah of writing the Sefer Torah, the definition of this really is receiving the Torah. Eibishter wants you to learn and have the Torah, but how are you going to receive that Torah? Only if you write it. If you write the Sefer Torah, that's a detail that you now will have the Sefer Torah. Was versteht in sein Asiyah, because this, to receive the Torah, to have the Torah, this consists of your action of zu nehmen und bekommen die Torah und lernen in to the action of taking and getting a Sefer Torah, to have it, to learn from it. So that's why the mitzvah is to write. That's how you can receive the Torah. Now the shaila is, what's the question of here? What's really the basis of the argument? Whether you have to actually write, or you can buy a ready-made Sefer Torah. Or we feel to what extent their poil, the person that's writing, the scribe or anyone, whoever is writing the Sefer Torah, or is it stam a person? Is it an expert scribe that knows how to write? Va'pu'ula, the action of the writing of the Sefer Torah, all the details that goes into, all the halachas that go into how a Sefer Torah is written. To what extent is this connected, and to what extent it defines the outcome here, which means the fulfillment of the mitzvah of the writing of the Sefer Torah, the Kabbalah Satayra, that you now have that Sefer Torah that you have to write and have available for you. Okay, so this really brings us back to the point that the Rebbe discussed before, that when you write a Sefer Torah, because of the chefza of a Sefer Torah, because of the object and the halachas of a Sefer Torah, so there are automatically certain halachas that will apply to the poil and the pu'ula in writing the Sefer Torah. So now we bald as b'deiris harishonim, since in earlier generations. Is the mitzvah va'ata kisvu lechem geven verbunden mit a Sefer Torah. So then the mitzvah of writing the Sefer Torah was only with a Sefer Torah. Shehayu kaisvim Sefer Torah v'lemdim by, to write a Sefer Torah and they learned from it. Was the Rebbe mus diksiv zayin l'shma. So then the pu'ula of how it's done, and the poil, the pu'ula, it has to be written dafka for the sake of the Sefer Torah with the kedusha. If a klaf ma'ubed u'mesurtet with a proper parchment, which is the hide is worked out properly and it's nice and smooth and it has the etches in it to be able to write on it properly. And all other conditions and things that define the way a Sefer Torah should be written. The whole Sefer Torah has to be written, not part of it. Is the chefze from Sefer Torah, so the object of the Sefer Torah itself and its kedusha that it demands, so it obligates and it forces kama v'kamet noyim basiyosai. So it forces different details in the person that's coming to create the Sefer Torah, und die pu'ulais, and the actions that have to be done. So veren a chelek von mitzvahs ksivas hashir hazais. So now it would be possible to say that since in that time period, this is the way the mitzvah is fulfilled, so then possibly we could say, true, the source of all these details of the kedusha of a Sefer Torah does not stem from the very mitzvah itself of writing a Sefer Torah, because that's just to write, to have the Kabbalah Satayra, to have the Sefer Torah available for you. But nevertheless, now that the actual fulfillment of the mitzvah is with a Sefer Torah, which has all these halachas, so the poil and the pu'ula, meaning the fact that now this is how you have to write it, becomes now a definition in the mitzvah of writing the Sefer Torah. This is now how the mitzvah of writing the Sefer Torah is fulfilled. That's possible to say so. Or perhaps we could say, which is the point really that the Rebbe said earlier in the Sikha, der poil on the alle tnaim sind enorm mitzat kedusha Sefer Torah. The person that's writing a Sefer Torah with all the details and the halacha of how the action of writing a Sefer Torah is done, Where do they stem from? This is just because of the Chefza, the Sefer Torah requires a certain Kedusha. Nit mitzad mitzvahs kisvu lechem es ashir hazeh v'lamda. It doesn't stem from the mitzvah of writing the Sefer Torah, and therefore these two things still remain separated from one another. There's the poyel and the pu'ula of the mitzvah, which has all these halachas about the kedusha, but then the actual mitzvah, the nifal of what the mitzvah here is to write the Sefer Torah, that does not require any of these halachas. Those are the two approaches here that you can have regarding writing a Sefer Torah. So again, according to everybody, we're not explaining over here that there's an argument regarding the very gedder, the very definition of the mitzvah itself. The Rebbe was makdam over here. That everybody agrees. The gedder of the mitzvah is the way the Rebbe defined it before, that there's the overall context and the concept of the mitzvah, which is to learn the Sefer Torah. And in order to be able to learn from the Sefer Torah, dafke writing it enhances that. But now the question is, in the time period when it could only be written with a Sefer Torah, the fact that now all the halachas of Sefer Torah apply, how does that affect the mitzvah of writing the Sefer Torah? Do we now sort of redefine the mitzvah of writing the Sefer Torah and say that this now becomes the gedder of the mitzvah itself? Or do we say, no, it remains two separate things? Und das ist die Asbara, so continuing in Siftes, this is the explanation from the zwei Deis Hanal of the two opinions, B'negeya, Kiyom Mitzvahs, Kisvu Lechem, when it is das Mekayim et Sefer Torah. This is the explanation of the two opinions regarding writing a Sefer Torah, but only when you fulfill it. This machlokes will only be when you fulfill the mitzvah with writing a Sefer Torah. Okay, so now, just to clarify here, if we were to define the machlokes between the Rambam and the versus Rashi, whether the mitzvah is to write or to buy, that they have a more general machlokes regarding the whole gather of the mitzvah. Is it about the action of writing, or is it about having? So then, that's a overall machlokes, whether you're dealing with a Sefer Torah, whether you're dealing with writing other svarim. Is the mitzvah the action to write, or is the mitzvah to have? But the Rebbe is not taking that route. The Rebbe is saying no, and the premise everyone agrees that the mitzvah is to write, because the writing is a detail that enhances the having of the learning of the Sefer Torah. That everybody agrees. So therefore now we could say that the machlokes applies specifically when you're writing a Sefer Torah. When you write a Sefer Torah, because the Sefer Torah has certain dinim, now the question is whether those dinim of writing a Sefer Torah, does that now become, as a result, a gather in the mitzvah itself, or do I say that it still remains separated from the gather of the mitzvah? Shittas Rambam Varma is, the opinion of the Rambam and the Rama is, wie Azibal, the mitzvah is verbunden mit the Kedusha von Ksiva Sefer Torah, because the mitzvah is connected to writing specifically a Sefer Torah with its proper holiness. Und the Kedusha is mechayev the Tnoya Maisa, and because of the Kedusha of the Sefer Torah, it demands certain conditions in this action. Ksivas HaSefer Torah. The mitzvah is, at that point, writing a Sefer Torah. So now this action here, this pu'ula, nit nor a prat in the chefze, it's not looked at as just a detail regarding the object, which happens to be now the fulfillment of the mitzvah in Kedusha Sefer Torah, details of halachas that stem from the holiness of the Sefer Torah, nor oich a chelek from the kiyum ha-mitzvah from kisvu lechem. This becomes now a part of the mitzvah of kisvu lechem, because this is the way it works. The pu'ula of the mitzvah automatically affects the overall gather of the mitzvah, and now it becomes the gather of the mitzvah to write a Sefer Torah with its kedusha. Und der Rebbe, wenn is mekayim the mitzvah metelas olav mitschreiben a Sefer Torah, when one fulfills the mitzvah that lies upon you by writing a Sefer Torah, darf sein die maisa mitzvah durch ksiva Sefer Torah. So the action of the mitzvah must be specifically through writing a Sefer Torah. Other magia zayin a Sefer Torah shahaya muta, or to check over a Sefer Torah, to check over a letter in the Sefer Torah that there was a mistake in it. Durch zayin pu'ula vert nigmar v'nishlam der kisvu lechem. By the action of writing a Sefer Torah, that's how you complete and you fulfill your mitzvah of writing. If you buy a ready written Sefer Torah, and you didn't check over anything, is nit yaitza. So you're not yaitza the mitzvah. Because regarding a Sefer Torah, this now becomes the definition of the mitzvah based on what the chefza of the Sefer Torah is, that affects the actual mitzvah itself. And here's where Rashi and the Nemuki Yosef disagree, is the Kedusha Sefer Torah nit a chelik from the mitzvah. the holiness of the Sefer Torah, that's not part of this mitzvah from Kisvu Lachem, of writing the writing the Sefer Torah. The Tnayim zenenar oif poyelin kedusha Sefer Torah. All those conditions regarding writing a Sefer Torah, they are just details because of the Sefer Torah that you're fulfilling the mitzvah with now. It stems from the kedusha of a Sefer Torah. So if so, we can say is oib the kedusha is shined up. So if the kedusha of the Sefer Torah is here already, it was already written, is oich be Sefer Torah maspik ven kanai. So then, even by a Sefer Torah, it'll be enough if you just buy the Sefer Torah, lokchem and ashuk, that you buy it from the prepared, the ready Sefer Torah from the marketplace. Because, according to Rashi and the Numukei Yosef, the mitzvah is to write. The Sefer Torah, all the halachas about the Sefer Torah, that's not negeya. Those are details that are mitzvah the kedusha of the Sefer Torah. So what it seems over here is, the point that the Rebbe is taking us to is that true, in the pasuk it says that the mitzvah is to write. However, what's the pshat in this? The point here is not the very action of writing is the definition of the mitzvah. True, the Torah Taka says write, and that's a chelik of the mitzvah. But as the Rebbe defined it before, it's only a prat of the mitzvah, because the writing is what enhances the velamda to be able to learn from the Sefer Torah. So if it's just that a prat mitzvah to enhance the velamda b'fiyem, so the action of actually writing is not necessarily required to fulfill the mitzvah. Yeah, Torah is saying kisvu, to write. But what does that mean? The kisvu is the gather of the mitzvah? That defines the whole mitzvah? No, not necessarily. So regarding the Sefer Torah, we see that Rashi and the Numukei Yosef say that you can go and buy a Sefer Torah minashuk. Why is that? Because the kedusha of the Sefer Torah is there already automatically. And the kedusha of the Sefer Torah does not have anything to do with the fulfillment of this mitzvah to have the Sefer Torah to learn from it. So too the kisvu, how's the kisvu fulfilled here? The kisvu is fulfilled by the fact that the Sefer Torah was written. That b'poil you have a Sefer Torah written and you're going to have it. So yeah, the Torah is saying kisvu, but the gather of the mitzvah is not the ma'isa ksiva. The kisvu is only a prat in the larger gather of the mitzvah, which is to have the Sefer Torah to learn from it. And therefore you can buy the Sefer Torah minashuk. That's what Rashi and Numukei Yosef say. So now if he says, move on, from this we can understand, as das was a idne, mitzvah lichtov, chumshei ha-Torah, mishnah, gemara, pirishain. The fact that today the Rosh says that you can fulfill the mitzvah by writing chumash and mishnah and gemara and so on, meint es nit afilo euch ledas harama as das muss sein beufen von ksivosoi oder b'shlichusoi oder durch magia seinem sefer. So today, when we fulfill the mitzvah by having printed svarim or by having the mishnayos, gemara and so on, so even the Rama will agree that today the mitzvah is not fulfilled by you writing it or appointing it, hiring a shliach to write it for you, or even through checking over a ice in the sefer. While these svarim mitzad in yonam, because when it comes to the svarim that we learn from today, so because of how these svarim are written, fadrin it as by zay zal zayin de ma'is. They don't demand action of a person. It's not when the Torah writes kisvu, yeah, kisvu is a prat of the mitzvah. But it's not the pshat that the very kisvu itself is the gather of the mitzvah. No, the gather of the mitzvah is to have it, to learn from it. And the kisvu is what enhances that. It's a prat that enhances that you should have it. But that will depend on the nature of how the mitzvah applies to the svarim that you're learning from. So just like we said according to the Rashi and the Numukei Yosef, that when it comes to the Sefer Torah, the kedusha of the Sefer Torah does not define the mitzvah itself. So if you have the kedusha of the Sefer Torah, you could fulfill the mitzvah without actually doing a ma'isa of writing it. So the same we could say regarding sfarim that we're learning from today, that the fulfillment of the mitzvah does not require an action. As ken zayin ma'isa kuf, you could have an action of a monkey. This is an expression that is used to define something where you don't need awareness of a person that's a bardas to write, or mechuna. You could have a machine that's printing. Abi zis ksuva. The point of here is that you have the written svarim. Is da ubishle musai. So you have, and to its fullest extent, v'lam da sima b'fiyah. This detail of writing to now have to be able to learn from it. Okay, so this is again taking all the point that the Rabbi said before regarding the definition of the mitzvah, that the writing is a detail in the larger gather of the mitzvah, and then bringing this to seeing over here the machlokes of the Rashi and the Numukei Yosef with the Rosh regarding whether you can buy a Sefer Torah. So then we apply that today, and we say that even the Rama will agree today, even though the Rama writes with Torah, you can't be Yetzer the mitzvah if you buy. But the Rama was only writing that regarding a Sefer Torah. But regarding today, learning from Sfarim, you can fulfill the kisvu, the writing, by having the writing of the Sfarim when it's printed. Now, the Lashon Harash v'Shulchan Aruch Kaisvin, the Chumashim, the actual language that the Rosh and the Shulchan Aruch say that you write the Chumashim. So why do they use this expression of Kaisvin? Weil the Makir Hadin v'Yisaydai is Kaisvin Sefer Torah, because the source of the din and the foundation of this is to write the Sfarim. In other words, unlike the other opinions that said that according to the Rosh, the writing is b'chlal not part of the mitzvah at all. The idea is to just have. The writing, that's just sort of a hechsher mitzvah. That's if you have to write to have, so you have to write. But the writing is not part of the mitzvah at all. That was the Shagas Ari's approach. The Rebbe rejected that because the Rosh uses the term kaisvim. The Rebbe is saying that no, the kaisvim is what the pasuk says, and that's a prat in the mitzvah, because that's what enhances the learning. But hayais, it's not together a mitzvah, it's only a prat of the mitzvah. So that kaisvim is fulfilled in every time period accordingly. So therefore the kaisvim, so we take that kaisvim and we apply it in every time period accordingly. And today, when you have printed sfarim, you have the ksiva of the Sefer Torah or of the sfarim b'shleimus, and it's best to its best level possible. So this is the explanation how and why people today buy ready printed sfarim, and with this we fulfill the mitzvah. And Sifir the Rebbe adds another detail to this in how we fulfill the mitzvah today. Al pizek kumtzu hasbara ubir ba'ifim kiyum mitzvahs va'ate kisvulachem es ashira azais vi mizdas makayim ha'edna. With this, we can add another detail here to explain how people fulfill this mitzvah of writing a Sefer Torah, which today is fulfilled by buying sfarim. Because you can still argue and say, are people really buying all the sfarim that it's necessary to know the mitzvahs and their pirushim? Maybe a person should have to buy all the Shulchan Aruch and the Paiskim, and if he doesn't buy all the sfarim yet, so then he's not fulfilling the mitzvah yet. But here the Rebbe says no, that we can say that the mitzvah is fulfilled b'shleimus. The Yeshleima Dugme, and we can give the following example. Just like when it comes to the mitzvah of learning, which is what this whole mitzvah of writing is really all based on, to enhance the learning of the Torah, is the chaint nit the seder as mizal up learning kol ha-Torah halachas kula. That first you have to learn all the halachas of the entire Torah, learn the entire Shisha Sidrei Mishnah, and only undernach, and only then and only then are you allowed to think and learn deeper and to discuss on a deeper level the ideas of Torah, to learn Gemara or more Be'in and so on. That's not to say that of the learning today. Even before a person finished learning the entire Mishnayos and he does not yet have the full fulfillment of Yediyas Kala Torah Kula, we already begin learning on a deeper level. Whatever the reason may be, the Rebbe here is not explaining why this is so, but that is a fact, and this is the way it's done. Al Pit Torah, that today, even before one finishes learning all of Torah, we begin already to learn Torah on a deeper level. So derech zeh is benegei zum kiyum mitzvahs kisvu lechem es ashira hazais. Same as also when it comes to the fulfillment of the mitzvah of writing the Sefer Torah. Ha'idna today, as das meint, this does not mean as mechuyev zu schreiben allein oder kaufen, that he would be obligated to write or buy on alle Sfarim, all Sfarim, Chamisha Chumshei HaTorah, Mishnah, Gemara, Upirusheim. Pirusheim is very undefined, so that could be a lot of Sfarim. On as Nordan is memekayim the mitzvah, and that only then you fulfill the mitzvah. But Pirusheim is a ribi godel. Pirusheim could include an abundance of Sfarim. Umaiserav, and you see, fact is, mizet bepoil the Sfarim was roi viden kukulam haben, zene nit mikol sugim anal v'chulam. That most people that have Sfarim, even people that have nice libraries, it doesn't necessarily include all the Pirushim and all the Paiskim necessary to know all the halachas. But nevertheless, the mitzvah is fulfilled. Just like when it comes to the learning, even before you know Kala Torah Kula, we learn and you're ma'ayin in one area and you fulfill the mitzvah, so too when it comes to the writing to have or buying, to have the Sfarim to learn from it, and that's what the Kisvu is about, that you should always have it available to review and so on. The mitzvah is fulfilled by having Sfarim that have halachas of Torah that you can learn from them, even if you don't have from all Kala Torah Kula. So now here the Rebbe comes back to the Lashon that the Rambam brings, which is actually in the Gemara. Sifir Aleph, we learn what's the meaning of this Lashon. Alpizez, move on. Now we understand what the Gemara sagt. The language that the Gemara says that Kosvai, if one writes a Sefer Torah himself, Mailol of Hakostov Ki'ilu Kibloi Mahar Sinai. it's considered as if you have received the Torah directly from Har Sinai. So now similarly, this is a Maila only when you write the Sefer Torah yourself. Und der Rambam bringt das herab, euch in Sefer Halacha Shaloi. The Rambam brings this down in his Sefer Halacha. So this is not just some kind of a reward, but the Rambam actually finds this necessary for the definition of the mitzvah here, and he quotes this here. Warum? Why is the Rambam bringing this? Das is der Geder von Mitzvahs va'ata kisvulachem. Because this schar is not just some side reward, but this helps us understand and define what is the mitzvah of writing the Sefer Torah. An inyan ume'en kabbalas HaTorah. The point there is, and this is somewhat of receiving the Torah, taking the Torah and having it available for you. Was kommt durch sein Asiyah, that comes through your action of writing the Sefer Torah, durch sein Schreiben und Zugreiten die Sefer Torah, to write and prepare the Sefer Torah, oder durch Kaufen die Sfarim anal me'meina. And today we could apply this even when a person spends money, he takes his money and buys Sfarim. We can say that you have that Kabbalah Torah, that and then by learning it, following that, so it's as if you're getting it directly from Sinai. That's how this is fulfilled today. Says no, but there's a difference here. So then the mitzvah was fulfilled specifically through writing a Sefer Torah. So when he writes it with his own hand, is by him the Kabbalah Satayra and Eifim Fishlemus. So then you have this mitzvah fulfilled fully, and it's as if you received it directly from Har Sinai, as is ähnlich zu dem Kabbalah HaTorah b'pam ha'alef, similar like when you received the Torah the first time, azoi, as das hat gebracht dem limud shmiras hamitzvahs b'shleimus. Over here as well, you write the Sefer Torah yourself, so this brings you to learn and to keep the mitzvahs fully and properly. But me'ein zeh is da b'chol zman u b'chol makim, somewhat of this, that it's as if you're receiving the Torah directly from Har Sinai and learning it and fulfilling it, you have in all times and in all places. When you buy and learn from these Sfarim, although you can't say it's exactly like when you write yourself, but nevertheless you have this somewhat in all times because the concept is being fulfilled the same. You're receiving the Torah, you're taking the Torah. That's the gather of this mitzvah. Not only that the Eibishter gives you it, but you now have it available for you to always learn from and therefore to be able to fulfill the mitzvahs. So from everything that we learned here, and we now understand that the fulfillment of this mitzvah is through buying Sfarim, it's also understood how important it is, the Ishtadlus, to see to it, to make an effort, as Yed Yid soll haben Sfarim in sein Haus, that every single Yid should have his own library of Sfarim in his house. And even better would be to have a house filled with Svarim. Aber al kapanim müssen sich bei ihm gefinden die Yesod Svarim. At least he should have the fundamental Svarim to learn from. Sidurim, to daven from. Chumashim, to have Chumash, with Tanakh, including all the Tanakh. Mishnayos, Sifrei Piskei Dinim, v'chulu, to have Mishnayos, and then the Svarim that you have to know to pasken the halachas. Und azal zayin, the velamdan zeh, and to actually learn from them, sima b'fiyem, place them in your mouth. So this is the actual practical application of the fulfillment of the mitzvah. And the more Sfarim, the better. Because Pirushayin, as it said before, the Rosh says, the Pirushim of the Gemara, it's really endless of the amount of Sfarim that you can buy to fulfill and enhance this mitzvah. See, if you base, the Rebbe adds another point regarding the original fulfillment of the mitzvah when you write a Sefer Torah. So going from subject to subject, coming back to the original writing of the mitzvah of writing a Sefer Torah, we can add as follows. The mitzvah from Ksiva Sefer Torah, the mitzvah of writing the Sefer Torah itself, was learned up from Pasuk Vata Kisvulachem es Hashira, is kanal call a Sefer Torah kula. So the mitzvah, even though in the Pasuk it says Shira, but nevertheless this means writing the entire Sefer Torah. So we could say about writing a Sefer Torah more than just the literal mitzvah that the pasuk is telling us to write a Sefer Torah, that the Sefer Torah has more in it. Since we know Chazal tell us there's nothing of all of Torah that's not hinted in the written Torah, is in that Sefer Torah, in this Sefer Torah that you write, in Torah Shebiksav, Merumez v'kolol oich kol HaTorah Shebal Peh kula. It's hinted in it, and it includes all of Torah Shebal Peh. was nitna leMoshe mi Sinai, which was given to Moshe from Sinai, Mishneh, Talmud, Agada, v'chulu, biz, kol masha Talmud v'asigas l'chadash v'chulu. Until any innovation, any new halacha that any student comes up with in any generation, it's all already there in the Sefer Torah that you write. So when you write a Sefer Torah, you're in essence writing all of Torah that was received at Har Sinai. That's as far as the actual Sefer Torah itself that you're writing. On Azay is a in the mitzvah from Ksivis Sefer Torah mitzad gavre. And the same is also true as far as the writing of the Sefer Torah, as far as the person that's accepting and taking the Torah, that he's taking all of Torah. Zok the Gemara, because the Gemara says, as there was schreibt the Sefer Torah is Maila Olav HaKosev, the Torah considers him to be Ki'ilu Kibloi Mahar Sinai, that he has received the Torah from Har Sinai, so that includes that he has accepted and received all of Torah, Torah Shebiksav and Torah Shebal Peh. Now, here regarding this last detail, that this applies also to what the person is receiving and taking when he writes a Torah Shebiksav, that this includes all of Torah, and we're proving it from this lashon that the Gemara says, that Ma'ila Olav HaKosev Kili Kibla Mahar Sinai, and therefore that includes all of Torah. But you may say that that expression of the Gemara is not a proof of this, because in Chod, as Bepash, just can learn, simply you could learn and say, as there Ma'ila Olav HaChulu, when it says here that it's as if you received the Torah from Har Sinai, meint das schar. This is just a reward. Dem schar as menutztes als araye as hot kishela atzmai mailas makabel Torah misinai. This is a reward which really just proves something else. It's not the reward as a result of the writing of the Sefer Torah here, but rather the fact that you went and wrote it yourself is a proof about the fact that you, on your own as a person, is receiving the Torah directly from Sinai. What does that mean? As the Rabbi Yosef says, sheyesh lemidas rachmim loima, that the attribute of mercy of Hashem says about this person, that just like he put in this tremendous effort to write an entire Sefer Torah himself, this individual, we know, would make the effort to go into a desert and receive the Torah from the Eibishter of Har Sinai. So meaning that when Chazal is saying that it's as if he received the Torah from Sinai, it's not a schar as a result of the Torah that you now have and wrote. This is just a sign. It's a proof that this is a person that's ready to work hard to receive the Torah directly from Hashem. But it's not a schar and it's not an outcome of the fact that you wrote the entire Torah. That's what the Rabbi Yosef says. But in the Rambam, so though we see differently. The Rambam in sein Sefer Hayad, the Rambam quotes this reward in his Halacha Sefer and Sefer Hayad, was besteht von Halachas Halachas. And the Rambam only brings things that are relevant for Halacha. Befragt, hat es hereingestellt inmitten der erste Halacha, wo es redt sich wegen der Mitzvah bepoil. The Rambam does not bring it somewhere towards the end of the halachas after he's done telling you all the halachas, but he brings it right in the beginning of the first halacha where he tells you what the mitzvah actually is. So the Rambam cannot be interpreting this like the Nemuke Yesa, that this is just some kind of a schar regarding the gavre, regarding the person himself, that it shows that he's ready to work hard to get the Torah. On is noch dabei Mishane von Lashon Gemara. Not only that, the Rambam actually changes a little bit from the language of the Gemara. Und sagt, v'im kosvai b'yodai, if you write it, if the person writes it with his own hands, harehi ki'ilu kibla Mar Sinai. It's as if he received it directly from Mar Sinai. So the Rambam is putting sort of more of an emphasis to this. The Gemara says, kosvai, ma'ila olav akosov ki'ilu. It doesn't say clearly b'yodai, and it says ma'ila olav akosov. The Rambam says, kosvai b'yodai harehi ki'ilu kibla Mar Sinai, which means if when the writing of the Sefer Torah is this, what you just did now, this itself is receiving the Torah from Har Sinai. Is mashma that inyan is aschar mesuvev von the mitzvahs ksiva sefer Torah. That the fact that you're receiving Torah from Har Sinai is a reward and is an outcome of what you just have done here, that you have now the sefer Torah that you wrote. What's the pshat in this? The Yeshleima, we can say an example for this, al derech hamalamed es ben chaveri Torah ma'ilol avakosov kilu yoldei. Chazal tell us if you teach someone Torah, so the person has no life of Torah, doesn't have Torah at all, and you not give him the life of Torah, you give him the knowledge of Torah, it's like a birth for him, and therefore it's as if he's been created again. This is a sikha that the Rabbi discusses at length over here earlier in the Chelek of Gimel. The Rabbi explains this. Same thing over here, the fact that you're writing a Sefer Torah, and you now have a living Sefer Torah available for you always here, so it's like you brought new life of Torah into the world. So therefore you've now received the Torah as if you received it directly from Har Sinai. That's according to the Rambam. So when a person writes the Sefer Torah, so he has the entire Torah with the Torah Shabbal Peh and everything in it, and the person now in his action that he's doing, he's receiving, he's taking the Torah from Har Sinai like the first time the Eibishter gave us the Torah. V'yehi ratzon, may it be the will of Hashem, as b'karev mamish speedily in our time, so zayin v'sechzena einenu, that our eyes should see b'bias melech HaMashiach mamish, to literally see the arrival of Mashiach. Und wird schreiben die Mishnah Torah l'shem HaMelech, and then a second Sefer Torah will be written for a king. Thus, we're there by the king. There's a unique halacha that yeh imoy tamid chulud, that besides the Sefer Torah that he has, that he keeps in his house all the time or in his palace, there's another Sefer Torah that he writes that has to be with him constantly. Shenema v'hoise imoy v'karabay kol yemei chayav. He has to have with him all the time and to read from it constantly. And the kingdom of Hashem will be revealed in the world, and V'hoya Hashem l'melech al kol haaretz, and the Eibishter will be king over the entire world, and V'yomahu yiyeh Hashem echad u'shmei echad, and then Hashem will be one and his name will be one.